Welcome to Market Momentum Tutorials. I hope you watched tutorial 1. There's a total of 9. It's a new concept in trading. And after watching all these, come to the website and learn more watching the video reports. It's a new concept. It's got support resistance areas you won't find on a normal chart.
Welcome to the tutorial on momentum lines, and we're first going to look at we've got lots of lines to look at and examples, but the key thing we have to think about is whether you have a descending momentum line or an ascending momentum line. Now there's certain rules applied to this, and we'll look at the descending momentum lines first. And one of the things we look at on a short-term basis is the 2-day momentum line. These obviously look longer than this, but I'll go through it with you. Now the general rules are, if you have a descending momentum line and a market opens above it, then generally that downward momentum line will hold. It's the major line. You also have a lower momentum line which comes underneath on the lower values. That's not so important, but it does help. We'll show you how. But the key line is the descending momentum line, and here you have a 2-day, which is actually was started up as a 2-day there, became a 3-day, and became a 4-day. But just looking at the last 2 days, this is where the rule applies. You have the 2-day, the market was above the momentum line, it held the momentum line, and it took out the high value there, momentum high value. If you've watched the video on momentum ranges and diffs, you'll know what this all means. And usually when it holds above a momentum line on a descending, it will take out the high value and go higher. Now the other rule with the descending momentum line is if the market has a descending momentum line, take these 2 days here in the middle and say that's just a 2-day. In fact, it's a 3-day. It can apply with 3 days in this case. And the market opened below a descending momentum line. However, because it's below a descending momentum line, it's allowed to break it as long as the low value is not broken. It can break, and this is where you get changes in trends. And you can see here it held us above the swing value and indeed broke up through the momentum line. If it opens above the momentum line, then it should hold it. But if it's below it, it can break it. And this is where if the diffs are both pointing up, the differentials are both pointing up, or one of them is pointing up, then you can anticipate that break, or you can use that momentum line as a stop level if you're still short, because obviously this market's come down. It had a big sell-off that day and reversed back up, but bang up through the momentum line the next day. It doesn't apply to these two, because you would have a new momentum line going up here, for which it stayed open below it, and again it would have come back below the low value and stayed below it, as in this case. Ascending momentum lines are the opposite. If your momentum ranges are ascending and you have an ascending momentum line, if the market opens below it, it should stay below it. If it opens above it, it can break down through it. And as long as that low value is broken, or once that low value is broken, it shouldn't really go back up through it. In this case, the market rallied back up to the momentum line and closed there. But you had your initial trade. Again here, this was a 2-day momentum line. Market opened above it. It held its momentum line. It doesn't have to break it. It can hold it. As for example here, you have a 3-day. It opened below it and held. Again, 1, 2, 3. This was 4 days. Stayed below that momentum line. At any time could have broken it as long as these low values weren't broken. And as you see in each case, the low value was broken, and the upper momentum line in this case was not broken. The lower momentum lines on here are the key ones on ascending momentum lines. And again, the rule is, just to repeat myself, if it opens below, as it did in this case for example, which is the major line, it stays below it. And if it opens above it, it can hold above it, and normally if it holds above it, it'll break that high value. But this market at that time was at stretch levels, so it ended up being an inside momentum day. And if you've watched the video on inside momentum days and momentum gaps, you'll know what that's all about. That's the essential rules, basic rules of descending momentum lines and ascending momentum lines. And now we're going to look at some examples. Here we have the cable daily momentum range chart. Okay, it looks very busy there. We're going to go over all of these individually, and let's just zoom in at the beginning. On this first one here, I'm going to remove these for the moment. This was actually the first, this one I'm removing up here now was the first momentum line, and that was the first lower momentum line was drawn. But we'll just take those away for the moment. As you can see, this 2-day momentum line here, we have a descending momentum line. The market actually opened just slightly below it and pushed straight up through it, which was a nice quick buy there. Now we had a lower momentum range trend line drawn as well on these 2 days. It actually started off here with this 2-day momentum range trend line. Market opened below the swing level and went down to the lower momentum range trend line. It helps give a target area for the downside. And indeed, on the 4th day, we still had this new 2-day momentum range trend line coming in here. And again, it banged out there. But we had an area of support from that momentum line. And indeed, this one on that day, once it broke up through it as a general area. Now, when you have a start of a move from a peak, and you have your first momentum line drawn in, it becomes a main momentum line, as you can see here. And then you draw a parallel line to the previous peak, and that also gives you a support area within the channel lines that you have here. There's an area for momentum ranges to build up from. This longer term momentum line, as you can see, became a proper momentum line as well in the longer term, because as it came up, it stopped against these two longer term momentum lines, and indeed it broke up through it, bang, to there. Again, this is a stretch level, and if you've watched the videos on a stretch level, you naturally have been exiting a position up there anyway. The market did go higher up the next 2 days, even though these long lines are lower. You can see they've gone up. Now on this one here, we had a peak, for example, and when we've got a first an A and a B leg, we drew this channel line, this trend line, long-term line in here, because it's become long-term. Once you have one of the things about momentum is you always use the last 2 points. So whether it's 2 days or again 2 peaks, that's what you use your momentum line, the last 2. So at this point, you've drawn this line, draw a parallel line to the previous peak, and we could see that that parallel line actually fitted that line better, so we use that as the line. And again, we have a channel where the major lines have helped. The other thing is that when you're at a stretch level, and again you've got 2 days down there at the stretch level, it's the beginning, rather like up here and up here, you draw your main line in, you've got a very flat line there, so it becomes potentially a major channel line, which it did. You draw you take the parallel line from there and you put it normally at the first peak, and again you can see where it's worked. And what you also do when you have the second peak is you add an extra line for a channel line, because we get channels. As you can see, I mean, it only went in there the once, and we only drew that channel line once it had done that, but it could have poked into it again up here and it would become a firm resistance area. We'll just get that because it's less busy. Now within this channel line, you can see clearly we also had a shorter little channel line there that we put in, and when we put it on the first peak there, gave us a target area for the next peak.